the thing from what it is to something totally different. This has been a question that has been of concern in alchemical researches for ages. The answer, of course, is extraordinarily simple. The answer lies in the human body itself. The process of digestion of food requires the transformation of elements. It requires an almost instantaneous adaptation of certain principles to special usages for which they were not originally intended. It is possible, therefore, for food which is taken in to in some way maintain a life principle which is not the food, which is not in the body otherwise, but it must be used to nourish the spiritual ends or principle in the human being. Therefore, the bread and butter, and the cheese and milk keep alive something that is not any of them. Keep alive a thing which throughout life will continue to cause the heart to beat, which will continue to circulate the blood and nourish the functions of the human being until the end of life. Therefore, out of what goes into him comes out of him arts and sciences, poetry and music, philosophy and science, religion and economics. They all come out of someone, and that someone is nourished by the food, by the atmosphere around him, by water, and by the rays of the planets and the light of the sun and moon. Therefore, the wedding of the sun and moon in alchemy is very important. Not because we're going to have a wedding up in the sky of the two luminaries, but because we're going to have a union of the principles for which they stand inside of the human body itself. So we have the amazing recognition that one life flowing behind all forms and made available through nutrition to every living creature. We find, consequently, that from the harvests in the fields, that a world is nourished, and those who eat these harvests become proficient in many forms of activity. Now, this, in a sense, is the problem that we find in the Christian doctrine of the Eucharist. Here we have a problem of the divine blood. And in alchemy, this divine blood is the elixir of life. How this divine blood operates is not clear to many people. But in some mysterious way, universal life supports living things. And these living things may never be aware of the source of their own nutrition. And in a mechanistic era such as ours, they do not care about the source of their nutrition. All they want is to keep on going. Now, out of all this has come a new concept of nutrition also. A concept involving vitamins and proteins and carbohydrates, and an entire system of nutrition based upon the development of highly specialized nutrients from the various food materials that we eat. That all these food things have something to do with the maintenance of the various structures of the human body. In this sense of the word, there is an acceptance of alchemy without any understanding of it. Here we have the realization that nutrition does do the work. But how this nutrition does it, and why it does it, and how one general type of nutrition can maintain an infinite diversity of creatures is another problem that is difficult to understand. One of the problems, of course, is that the nutrition must be regarded as conditioned to the creature which is receiving the nourishment. So we have within our own bodies an extraordinary laboratory, a laboratory the mysteries of which we haven't begun to touch. A laboratory in which every type of nutrient is made available to every type of living thing. And all this happens without a chemist sitting somewhere and arranging it all. We can, in nutrition, have someone who can help to make it practical. who can prescribe various materials for our common nutrition and for special emergencies that arise. But prescribing them is not creating them, and prescribing them is not understanding them. It is simply that we have gradually come to know that certain materials have certain effects, and we depend upon this to maintain the procedures which we hope will strengthen and lengthen our life expectancies. Now, immortal life was one of the beliefs of alchemy. So they had a number of very quaint and unusual concepts about this matter. Some of these concepts are very difficult to understand even now, but we know that they definitely believed that there were in the world a few individuals who had solved the mystery of alchemy. And the master of all the alchemists was Elias Atista, the most celebrated of all the Hermetic adepts and philosophers. No one really knew him, although we do have 2 or 3 early books in the library in which alchemists describe a meeting with him. But Elias Atista was the symbol of the perfect alchemist. He had a number of disciples, however, who came very close to him in achieving the ends which he sought. And the powers of Elias were such that he would appear in laboratories where worthy persons had worked very hard for years and given them a hint or a little advice to advance their researches. Then he disappeared and was never seen by them again. He appeared in many nations and in many different appearances. He spoke many languages, but he is supposed to be an eternal person, living on and on, because there was nothing within himself to cause him to die. Death has to be the result of causes, and life expectancies are increasing constantly. But life expectancies to reach phenomenal extension of time are now either a phenomenon in themselves, or else they are the result of very serious scientific conditioning or constitutional ability to adapt nutrition over a longer period of time than is possible to most people. The alchemists also pointed out that the beginning of the alchemical experiment was, of course, to remove all friction from life. By friction we mean wear and tear. Now, what is wear and tear? Well, to most people, wear and tear is doing the things they have to do and have no particular interest in doing. Wear and tear is also the result of the lack of control of the mental, emotional, and physical activities of the individual. All of these activities use energy. A large part of the energy we use today we waste. We are not conserving it. We are not taking care of this mysterious vitality that comes to us. We are allowing it to be expended in all kinds of useless ways. Of course, we have to make physical adjustments for employment and things of this nature, but at the same time, it isn't the work necessarily that is the greatest cause of problem. It is the attitude toward the work. It is the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of recognition of significance of the things that we do that depresses. Then emotional relationships, out of hand, can become a terrible enemy to vitality. Worry, fear, anxiety, all of these use up part of this alchemical nutrition that is constantly being made within ourselves. If we waste it, we can no longer have it. If we use it unwisely, it is dissipated. And gradually, to keep on with the artificial attitudes that we have, we undermine the necessary functions of the body. So the alchemists, first of all, declared that the master of all arts was God. Deity was, in a sense, the extra-personal, perfect alchemist. because in deity all things continue according to the divine will. How this will operates, man does not know exactly, but he does recognize, if he is mystically inclined, that there is a tremendous background of eternal wisdom behind the things that happen in nature. And so deity becomes the perfect force behind generation and regeneration. The deity brings forth the seed, the plant, the flower, and the fruit. And then that seed becomes the next generation of the same. And in alchemy, these seeds are called the tears of God, because they are the weepings which produce life everywhere. The symbolism is strange and obscure, but we can gradually work some of it into a pattern if we try hard enough. We must begin with what the alchemist begins with, base metals. We must begin with things as they are here, visibly and inevitably. We cannot build our alchemical formulas from elements or substances not available to us. So the beginning of all things is to recognize that the first operation is a transmutation of physical factors, elements, and properties. In other words, purification. If it's mercury, it must be purified. If it is sulfur, it must be purified. If it is salt, it must be purified. And if it is man, he must be purified. Everything begins with the purification or the removal of the dross, which limits the value and limits the survival of elements, principles, and substances. So we start with the concept of a pure material with which to work. The alchemist is given various clues and keys on how to achieve this pure material. He might assemble it under certain aspects of planets. He might wait until the moon shines upon the water before he uses it in his test tubes. He may do all kinds of things. He must purify, first of all, by gathering his materials from pure sources, as much as he can. Most of the great experiments of Paracelsus and many others were possible because of the pure high atmosphere of the Alps. Here materials were uncontaminated. Here things grew to the fullness of themselves. And here in his day there was no smog or congestion. These pure materials, having been found, become the basic elements with which to work. Now you may have to go out and work and look and search for a long time to find a pure material in workable condition, something that you can actually use. Now the same problem applies to the person himself. The alchemist must first purify his own body and his own nature. Until the body is cleansed, its various processes cannot be refined, because actually all the purification in man, all the integration and organization of his abilities and capacities, all the improvement of his nature through learning, through meditation, and through contemplation, all of these things lead up to, contribute to, and make possible a final internal illumination. The final secret has to come from inside. Therefore, everything has to be refined until the soul of itself is available. And in man it is his own soul. And until this is available, he labors in vain. Now the things that have to contribute to this progress must be considered as disciplines or as first steps toward achievement. They represent, first of all, man's recognition of his responsibility to the life principle which exists in him and in which he exists. This principle is divine, sacred, and the most valuable and mysterious thing in the whole world. Unless the individual is true to this basic principle in his own life and his own way of living and thinking, he cannot hope to advance in the cause of spiritual alchemy. So he must do everything possible to make his own life reasonable and normal. Now, this doesn't mean that he has to